All right, good morning. Welcome to our weekly webinar. We're here today on the topic of inclusive education and how to accommodate disabilities in the classroom. And Lotte Hill will be here to take us off. So I'm passing it off to you, Lotte. Thanks for being here with us.
Yes, thank you. And welcome to everyone. So today we're gonna show a little bit more into the students' perspective of like how we think that inclusivity could be achieved in your classroom. So we actually had a similar presentation to this back in March, where we had a design session together with students and lecturers on how to make your classroom more inclusive. And one of the things that I'll always find interesting to share is the question that we also pose there is, what does inclusivity mean to you? And we got a broad range of answers, mostly to give equal chances, get rid of barriers, but also to be open to other opportunities or students who need more accommodation than others. So when looking into the importance of making your classroom as inclusive as possible, we can first see that 9% of students are known to have a disability, which is in numbers 2,287 at TU Delft. Well, if we look at the national estimate made by Expertise Centrum about inclusive education, this number is actually around 30%. And this is, of course, higher because there are students who does not give notice that they have a disability to the TU Delft, or sometimes they aren't even aware yet when they start studying that they have a disability. And in the end, if like studying with a disability takes a lot more time than studying without a disability, which makes that students with a disability are 50% more likely to experience delay, especially if they were not to get the right accommodation during their studies or do not get assistance. This delay can increase, or we can even, or on the other hand, we could minimize it maybe with giving the right accommodation. And to put this in a more viewable way, students with autism spend on average 4.4 hours per week more than regular students. So of course, then you can see that the delay kind of makes sense, that it takes them longer to finish their studies. So after this introduction, small introduction with the numbers, let's see what we're going to discuss today. So today we're first going to introduce who are we. So I'm from Student Onbeperkt. We're going to talk a little bit about Student Onbeperkt. Then we go to the student's perspective. Here, Tim and I will share our stories, which will both have some downsides, but also some upsides. And then we have some time for a discussion, and afterwards you can ask any questions that you still have remaining. Okay, so who are we? So Tim and I and Eliana, we are the current board of Student Onbeperkt. And Student Onbeperkt is a student initiative. Back in 2018, the TU Delft was already assembling a group of students with disabilities to give feedback on what could be improved, what are things that don't go well for students with a disability at the moment. And at that time, it was mostly the TU Delft asking us questions, but we wanted to do more than that. So in 2020, we decided that we wanted to set up Student Onbeperkt, do not only accommodate the TU Delft with answering their questions on what they could improve in the policy, but also some other goals which I put on here. So we also want to bring people together with the students who have disabilities together to share their experiences. And the nice part of this, what we have noticed, is that it's you can share your story so that at least someone is listening, but you can also find recognition that people have experienced the same thing. So it's like you're not that much out of the ordinary because there are more people experiencing the same problem. And moreover, if you have experienced the same problem, you can also give tips and tricks. And that's also a lot what we do a lot in our group chats or during our monthly meetings. And then one of the other goals is providing information to students and staff members, which is, of course, what we are doing now as well with this webinar. and giving feedback to the TU on the policy. It was, of course, our starting goal and is still going on as well. So then I want to go to Tim to share his story with his experience with studying with a disability.
Yes. Hi, everybody. This is the picture you see here is one we used on the flyers. It's unfortunately in Dutch, but so yes. So I am Tim. I'm 28 by now, and I'm almost finishing my thesis after 9 years of studying. And there's a reason that I took so long, and now I want to share some of my story with you. When I was 12, I was diagnosed with Asperger's and ADHD. Asperger's is a form of autism. And high school was a pretty difficult time for me. So when I went to university, I really saw it as a fresh start. This was really going to be my moment where nobody knew I had a disability. Nobody knew I had autism. I wouldn't be the weird person. I could be just like everybody else. And but when I started studying, I really felt such a pressure to fit in and to behave normal and to prove that I was actually a social person, that I was not that weird kid. But when I was actually studying, I found it really hard still to connect with my other students. And with my ADHD, I found it really hard to sit in lectures. Just having to sit there and having to focus, and then every time someone slightly moves, you just lost it. Just every 2-3 minutes, just having to force your attention back to the slides because it just doesn't work for me. So after my first year, I pretty much stopped going to lectures and just learned only from books because I just could not. It took me so much effort to concentrate on lectures. That coupled with also my difficulty to connect with other students meant I became very isolated. And for almost a year, I just did not leave the house. I was complete shut in. I only left the house to do shopping and to go to exams once every quarter. And that was it. It took me up to my master's for the first time to actually be able to mention to someone at the university, to mention to a student counselor that I had a disability. To me, that barrier was so high, and it was felt so much like admitting defeat for myself that, yeah, only after 6 years of studying at the university, I was at a point where I really could not do it anymore, and I first time actually tried to seek help. And that was actually the reaction was so positive. I had to do an internship, and I went to the internship coordinator to ask, hey, I have autism, I find this really difficult. And immediately was like, okay, cool, very brave of you that you say this. But we have students here at TU Delft with autism, can't you do something for them? And that just getting over it for me to find help and to know that that was actually accepted and to get over that shame, that made such a big change in my life. And now I'm almost graduating. Now I'm at St. Onbeperkt, and now I can be very open about my disabilities. So that is my story, and that is what I wanted to share with you. I'll give it back to Lotte.
Thank you, Tim. And then we're going to continue with my story, which already starts a little bit different than Tim's story, because when I was 2 years before I started studying at TU Delft, I contacted my study advisor, who is your first person you have to go to if you have a disability and ask for accommodation and stuff like that. So already before I started studying, I went to my to the study advisors of the study that I wanted to do, and I asked him, is it possible with a visual impairment to do these studies? Of course, I know that they cannot reject me on grounds of a disability. But if he would not have if he would have said maybe it's not as smart because applied earth science is like a very visual studies, you have to really have a good look at rocks and field work. So if he would have said it's not recommendable, then okay, I might have searched for something else. But I was really happy with the way that our first conversation went. He already had contact with a lecturer to ask, like, okay, what will be the possibilities? Like, are there adaptations possible? And I just got a yes. Of course, you can do these studies. We will accommodate you, and we can. He even gave me some ideas on, for example, housing. As a student with a disability, you can also get housing on the TU Delft campus, especially with biking in Delft. It's quite dangerous, so that was a good solution. And that way I was already familiar with the TU Delft. And when I actually started my studies, I again had a lot of meetings with my study advisor to request special accommodation, but also like, how is it going? Do you need something from me? It was like a really open conversation. He was really okay with helping me, and he really did his best also to help me as well as possible. I know that a visual impairment does not occur that much at the TU Delft. Like, it's one of the more special disabilities, if you want to call it that. And I also needed accommodation that they had never seen before. So I'm using, of course, a magnifier. I'm using a magnifier program on my computer, which they had to install. They had to arrange a computer for me. But I also have 50% extra exam time, which is a lot compared to the regular extra exam time. So they also had to arrange that. And so at the beginning of every course, I emailed my lecturer that I have a visual impairment. I always communicated that I have a visual impairment. Not everyone, not every student is as comfortable with sharing their specific disabilities as I am, but I was like, I don't see the problem in it. And they were always, when I asked them for the accommodation, okay, there are, of course, a few cases which were not so nice, but usually they were always, okay, we'll arrange that. You'll get your exam on your computer. We will take a USB drive with you. We will make sure that the slides are on the Brightspace space before the lecture starts, because I'm using a camera to visualize the blackboard and the screen. And of course, if you're projecting a PowerPoint and then zooming in on that projected PowerPoint with a camera, it makes the contrast a lot lower. So they were usually really well with accommodating me, even though there were some difficulties, especially, for example, with having an exam room that is available for 4.5 hours instead of only the 3 hours. So I was actually really happy with how it's going now, and with the openness that lecturers have shown me. Of course, I have to do the first step as a student, but just that they are willing to think with me about how are we going to solve this fieldwork, or how are we going to solve this practicum, really helped me that I could solve the problems that I was facing at that time. And I already included some tips in my talk, but we also had, during our last presentation in March with students and lecturers, we mostly focused on tips on how to make your classroom more inclusive. And I have actually, I already sent a file to Naomi, who will share it with you, or has already shared it with you. But I also wanted to put some light on some of these tips. For example, know what disabilities you have in your classroom. As I said, not everyone is as comfortable with sharing their disability. So, for example, an option would be to have an anonymous survey. And of course, the openness to communicate really helped me a lot, and also Tim in the end, to feel more comfortable with asking for help and accommodations that you actually need to make your studies more accessible. Then, of course, guidance is also a really important part, especially most of our students in Student Onbeperkt. Most of our members in Student Onbeperkt have autism. And that means that a clear guidance is really nice, that they have structure, that they don't have to worry about planning because the planning is already made. But if you were to have a bad week or you're low in energy, that there's at least some flexibility in deadlines and stuff like that. Also letting students know what they could, for example, what they have to do for a report or an exam, like what can they expect for an exam or a presentation, that you at least put an example on, okay, this is what we expect. And if you at least do this amount of work, you will get a pass. So giving an example report of Mark 7 instead of like a perfect example report, which is too much work maybe to make. Well, then in your classroom, we also have a few tips out of our selection of tips that we have made. Is regular breaks, especially now with online education. It's really hard to focus for a long time on your screen. There are so many distractions. You are only focusing on your screen. The regular breaks are really recommendable. And the recording lectures with subtitles also also help students that they can rewatch the lectures later or even slow them down. In some cases, which I also have noticed, is that lectures go too fast, and then being able to like put them on slower or just pause them for a moment so you can have a look at the PowerPoint really helps. Something that then can also help is, of course, putting the PowerPoints on before your lectures and make your slides readable. I think that one is quite logical.